My name is Clara Meadows. My father was a watchmaker, a man who saw the world not as a series of grand, sweeping events, but as an infinite collection of tiny, interlocking gears. He taught me that beauty lived in precision, that harmony was a product of 100 minuscule parts, each performing its function perfectly, invisibly. He would sit for hours at his worn wooden bench, a loupe pressed to his eye, his breathing slow and even, coaxing a silent, intricate universe back to life. "The face tells the time, Clara," he'd say, his voice a low murmur against the ticking of a dozen finished clocks, "but the heart, the movement, that's what makes time. No one sees it, but without it, the hands are just decoration." For the past 7 years, I have been the heart of my department at Ethelred Digital. I was the movement, the invisible collection of gears that made everything run. And, just like my father's watches, no one ever looked past the face. I live in Port Blossom, a city of bridges and rain, where the air smells of damp earth and roasting coffee. It's a place of verdant, untamed green pushing up through the cracks in the concrete, a constant reminder that life persists, even when paved over. My apartment overlooks the Willamette River, and on clear mornings, the peak of Mount Hood stands like a distant, silent promise. It's a beauty I'd mostly observed through the window of my bus on the way to a downtown high-rise, a glass and steel monolith that felt like the antithesis of everything Port Blossom stood for. Inside that building, under the steady, humming glare of fluorescent lights, I had built my career. Or rather, I had built the scaffolding upon which my boss, Eleanor Vance, had built hers. When I joined the client integration team, it was a study in chaos. Processes were unwritten, passed down like folklore, and every staff change triggered a new crisis. I spent my first year like an archaeologist, digging through old email chains, reverse engineering corrupted spreadsheets, and interviewing long-gone employees to reconstruct the department's institutional memory. From that chaos, I created what my team jokingly called the Atlas. It was a comprehensive, cross-referenced digital repository of every process, every client history, every technical workaround, and every regulatory nuance our department handled. It was my masterpiece of order, a perfectly calibrated system of interlocking parts. It was also my cage. Because it worked so well, because I maintained it so flawlessly, there was never any need for anyone else, especially Eleanor, to understand the intricate movement within. They only needed to look at the face and see that the time was correct. Eleanor was a woman sculpted from polished marble and quiet ambition. She was a master of the presentation, the quarterly review, the executive handshake. She spoke in confident, forward-looking statements and had a talent for framing my meticulous, behind-the-scenes work as her own strategic oversight. "Clara is my rock," she'd say in meetings, a statement that was meant to sound like a compliment but felt more like a geological classification. A rock is foundational, yes, but it doesn't move. It doesn't get promoted. Which brought me to this moment. The sky outside Eleanor's corner office was the color of slate, a soft, persistent drizzle blurring the cityscape into a watercolor painting. I sat across from her immaculate glass desk, my hands resting on the portfolio in my Lapa portfolio detailing 7 years of sacrificed evenings, of patient problem-solving, of weaving coherence out of corporate entropy. It was my application for the newly opened Director of Client Strategy position. Eleanor slid it back across the desk toward me, the movement smooth and dismissive. She adjusted the delicate silver frames of her glasses. "Clara, I appreciate the effort you put into this," she began, her tone gentle, practiced, the kind one uses to deliver disappointing news without inviting an emotional response. "I've reviewed it, of course. And while your work in your current role has been more than sufficient, I don't believe you have the high-level, forward-facing experience required for a director-level position." Sufficient. The word landed between us, small and hard and cold. It wasn't a stone, it was a tiny, perfectly polished ball bearing, frictionless and impossible to grasp. I had single-handedly salvaged the Viridian account, a multi-million-dollar contract that was hours from collapse. I had designed the workflow that increased our team's efficiency by 30%. I hadn't taken a real vacation one where I didn't check my email in 4 years. All of it, apparently, amounted to sufficient. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the quiet, profound click of a final gear falling out of alignment. The intricate watch of my professional life had just stopped ticking. "I see," I said, and the placid smile that appeared on my face was an old, familiar mask. It was the face of the watch, serene and untroubled. "Thank you for the candid feedback, Eleanor. It's helpful to know where I stand." "I'm glad we're on the same page," she replied, her eyes already flicking to her monitor. "Now, the Finch-Halstead Group has flagged some concerns about their Q3 integration. I've CC'd you on the chain. Could you get a handle on it and draft a response for my review by end of day?" "Of course," I said, gathering my portfolio. The weight of it felt different now. Not the weight of ambition, but the dead weight of a story that had reached its end. As I walked back to my cubicle, past the empty director's office that felt like it should have been mine, I didn't feel defeated. I felt awake. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my companion for years had gone silent. In its place was a crystalline clarity. My father had once told me that the most common reason a fine watch stops is not because a part breaks, but because of a slow, imperceptible buildup of friction. Grains of dust, a thickening of oil, the slow grind of metal on metal. My career hadn't broken, it had just slowly, quietly seized up. I sat in my car in the subterranean twilight of the parking garage, the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers measuring out the silence. The woman in the rearview mirror looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She looked like she had finally understood the design of the machine she was in. And she was about to remove a critical part. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to cancel the reservation for a small cabin on the coast, a trip I'd planned for the following week, my first attempt at a real vacation. The second was to the Serenity Grove assisted living facility on the other side of town. "Hi, is this Martha?" I asked the cheerful voice on the line. "This is Clara Meadows, Catherine's daughter. I know it's last minute, but would it be all right if I came for a long visit tomorrow? And for the rest of the week?" There was a pause. "Clara." "Of course. Your mother will be so thrilled. Is everything all right?" "Everything," I said, and the word felt true for the first time in a long time, "is about to be." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged out of my work accounts on my personal laptop. I turned off my work phone and placed it in a drawer. The silence it left behind was vast and unnerving, like the sudden absence of a city's traffic hum. It was the sound of my own life waiting for me. The next morning, I did not wake at 5:45 a.m. to review overnight emails from our European clients. I woke at 7 to the sound of rain against my windowpane. I made myself a proper breakfast, sitting at my small kitchen table and watching the river flow, gray and swollen, beneath the Fremont Bridge. I arrived at the office at 9:02 a.m. The subtle shift in the office atmosphere was immediate. Leo, a perpetually stressed-out project manager from the adjacent department, was already hovering near my cubicle. "Clara, thank God. Did you see the server alert from last night? The one about the archival system? It's throwing up errors and none of the reports for the morning meeting are generating." Normally, I would have already seen the alert, diagnosed the problem, a known bug in the third-party software, applied the workaround documented deep within the atlas, and rerouted the reports through a secondary server. The crisis would have been resolved before anyone even knew it was a crisis. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I did see the automated alert, yes," I said, setting my mug down on a coaster. "You'll need to file a ticket with IT. They handle server infrastructure." Leo stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "IT? But Clara, they'll take 6 hours to even respond. You always just, fix it." "My new focus is on streamlining my core responsibilities," I said, reciting a line I had practiced in the shower. I offered him a small, polite smile. "I'm recalibrating my workflow to better align with my job description. It's a professional growth exercise." He looked utterly bewildered, as if I had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. He hovered for another moment, expecting me to break, to relent, to say, "Oh, all right, just this once." I simply turned to my monitor and began sorting my emails, addressing only those sent directly to me from my own team members about projects explicitly under my purview. The wider currents of chaos, the dozens of emails where I was CC'd for awareness, a corporate euphemism for in case this explodes, and we need someone to fix it, I let them flow past me untouched. By lunchtime, the low hum of anxiety in the office had sharpened to a distinct buzz. Eleanor had walked past my desk 3 times, her stride clipped and purposeful, a faint line of concern etched between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. I took my full hour for lunch. I didn't eat a sad salad at my desk while triaging problems. I put on my raincoat and walked. The rain had softened to a fine mist, and the air along the waterfront was clean and sharp. I watched the Hawthorne Bridge lift its heavy concrete wings to let a barge pass, a slow, powerful, and visible act of labor. No one wondered what hidden gears made it work. They simply watched it happen, an undeniable display of function. For the first time in a long time, I felt my own shoulders relax, my own breathing deepen. I was not solving a single problem that was not my own. The feeling was intoxicating. That afternoon, I drove to Serenity Grove. The facility was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by ancient Douglas firs that dripped with moss and memory. My mother, Catherine, was in the sunroom, a book resting in her lap. Her face lit up when she saw me, a genuine, unreserved joy that I realized I had been starving for. "Clara, darling." What a wonderful surprise. Her hands felt frail in mine, the skin as soft and thin as old paper. We didn't talk about much. We talked about the finches at the bird feeder, about the plot of a novel she was reading, about the terrible watercolor paintings a resident named Stan insisted on hanging in the hallway. Her mind wandered, as it often did, but her presence was a balm. I was not there to fix anything. I was just there to be her daughter. My personal phone, which I'd left on, buzzed in my pocket. A text from Leo, "IT can't figure out the server issue. Eleanor is furious. The Finch-Halstead call is in an hour and she has no data. Do you know anything about a manual override mentioned in some old email?" I looked at my mother, who was smiling at a squirrel scolding a blue jay outside the window. I typed back a single, simple sentence. "That sounds like a question for your department's designated systems expert." I hit send and silenced my phone. My mother turned back to me. "You seem different today, dear," she said, her gaze surprisingly lucid. "You seem lighter." "I feel lighter, Mom," I said, and the truth of it resonated deep in my bones. The next morning, the office was no longer buzzing. It was vibrating with a palpable panic. The Finch-Halstead call had evidently been a disaster. Eleanor was in her office with the door closed, but I could see her silhouette pacing back and forth. Several senior people from other departments were huddled by the coffee machine, speaking in low, urgent tones. I sat at my desk, opened my task list for the day, and began methodically working my way through it. The work that was actually, officially mine. It was a surprisingly short list. At 10:30 a.m., Eleanor appeared at my cubicle. Her composure, usually so flawless, was frayed at the edges. Her face was pale. "Clara." "My office." "Now." I followed her, my footsteps quiet and unhurried. She closed the door behind us with a sharp click. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice a low, furious tremor. "The archival server is down. The Finch-Halstead data is a mess. Leo told me you refused to help." I didn't refuse, I corrected gently. I directed him to the appropriate channel. "My role doesn't include IT infrastructure support. Don't play games with me, Clara. You've handled that system for 5 years. You're the only one who understands its quirks. You built the damn thing." "I documented the damn thing," I replied, my voice still even. "Every process, every workaround is in the atlas. It's titled Archival System Manual Override Protocol, Section 4, Subsection B." Eleanor stared at me, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "I don't have time to read a technical manual. The client is threatening to escalate to our executive VP. I need you to fix it." "I'm afraid I can't," I said. "I have that mandatory compliance training webinar at 11. It's been on the calendar for a month." I'm sure you understand the importance of regulatory adherence. I watched a tide of red creep up her neck. She knew she was beaten. She had built her career on the performance of professionalism in deadlines and protocols and hierarchies. I was simply using that same structure as a shield. "This is incredibly disappointing, Clara," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I know," I said. "Feeling like your contributions aren't being seen is a very disappointing feeling." I left her office, the silence behind me more potent than any shouting match. I spent the rest of the day in my webinar, taking meticulous notes. I left the office at 5 o'clock sharp. When I got home, I opened the drawer and looked at my work phone. 47 missed calls. A string of increasingly frantic voicemails. I listened to the first one, from Eleanor. Her voice was strained. "Clara, call me the second you get this. It's not just Finch Halstead anymore. The quarterly analytics report for the entire division failed to run. It seems to be linked to the archival server. Mr. Harrison is asking for it." Mr. Harrison was the executive vice president for the entire West Coast operation. He was a distant, powerful figure, someone I'd only ever seen in company-wide town halls. I put the phone back in the drawer and went to my father's old workbench, which I kept in a small, sunlit corner of my living room. I picked up one of his favorite tools, a tiny, elegant screwdriver with a polished rosewood handle. I thought about the invisible, intricate movements of the company and how I had been the mainspring for so long. And I wondered what it felt like when a mainspring finally, quietly unwound. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep. The air in the office the next morning was thick with the metallic tang of corporate fear. People scurried past my desk, their faces drawn, avoiding eye contact as if my newfound inactivity were contagious. Through her glass wall, I could see Eleanor in a conference call, gesturing emphatically, her face a mask of strained control. Mr. Harrison's executive assistant, a woman with a famously serene demeanor, was standing by the elevators, looking anything but serene. I booted up my computer, the familiar chime sounding strangely cheerful in the funereal atmosphere. I was 5 minutes into composing an email about project timelines when Eleanor's assistant appeared at my shoulder. "Clara. Mr. Harrison wants to see you. Conference room 3. Immediately." I gathered a notebook and a pen, my movements deliberate. As I walked down the hall, I felt a peculiar sense of calm, the quiet focus of my father preparing to disassemble a complex timepiece. I was no longer just a gear in the machine. I was the watchmaker, about to explain why it had stopped working. Mr. Harrison and Eleanor were waiting at the long mahogany table. The tension in the room was a physical presence. Mr. Harrison was an imposing man, tall and silver-haired, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He did not look happy. "Clara," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "Thank you for joining us. We seem to have a series of cascading system failures that no one, including our IT department, can seem to solve. And every time they dig into a problem, they find a reference to a documentation system they can't make sense of. A system, I'm told, you created." "That would be the Atlas," I confirmed, taking a seat. "It's a comprehensive guide to the department's operational workflows." "And why is it," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "that you seem to be the only person capable of interpreting it?" Before I could answer, Eleanor broke in, her voice tight. "What Mr. Harrison means to say, Clara, is that we need your help. This situation with Finch Halstead and the divisional reports needs to be resolved. Immediately." I looked from her strained face to Mr. Harrison's assessing gaze. The moment of truth. The face of the watch was no longer sufficient. They needed to see the movement. "I understand the urgency," I said calmly. "However, my ability to assist is somewhat complicated by the fact that I have decided to resign from Ethelred Digital." I slid a simple, one-page letter across the polished table. My 2 weeks' notice. Silence. It was absolute. Eleanor's face went from pale to chalk white. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows shot up, his first sign of genuine surprise. He picked up the letter, glanced at it, and set it down decisively. That, he said, his voice losing its hard edge and taking on a new tone of weary curiosity, is not the solution I was expecting. May I ask why? I believe I've reached the limit of my growth potential in my current role, I said, meeting his eyes directly. My recent application for the director position was declined on the grounds that I lacked the necessary qualifications. I've come to agree with that assessment. My qualifications are clearly not suited for the career path available to me here. Eleanor flinched as if I'd struck her. Mr. Harrison, however, leaned forward, a flicker of something amusement in his eyes. Eleanor, he said, without looking at her. Would you please excuse us for a few minutes? Her hesitation was almost imperceptible, but she stood, smoothed her skirt, and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The click echoed in the silence. All right, Clara, Mr. Harrison said, his tone shifting from executive to something more direct, more human. Let's talk. No corporate jargon. Tell me what's really going on. This was it. Not a negotiation about a salary or a title. It was a conversation about value. My value. For 7 years, Mr. Harrison, I began, my voice quiet but firm, I have been the person who keeps things running. I've built the systems, documented the processes, and put out the fires. I did it because I'm good at it, and because, like my father, who was a watchmaker, I find a deep satisfaction in making complex things work perfectly. I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I was content to be the invisible part of the machine, I continued. I believed that consistent, excellent work would eventually be recognized. I was wrong. I was told my work was sufficient and that I wasn't qualified for leadership. The truth is, my leadership has been happening every day, in every crisis I've averted and every system I've stabilized. The problem is that the kind of leadership that prevents disasters is invisible. This company, or at least this department, only recognizes leadership that cleans up disasters. I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. The systems are failing now not because I've sabotaged them, but because for the first time, I have stepped back and allowed them to run exactly as they were designed to, without my constant, invisible intervention. The failures you're seeing are the system's normal state. My sufficient work was the only thing holding it all together. Mr. Harrison was silent for a long time, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. He stared at the wall, but I could tell he was seeing the entire situation with a new, unwelcome clarity. You've made your point with remarkable precision, he said finally. He looked back at me. You said you were resigning. Do you have another offer? No, I said honestly. I have a week of personal time I plan to take to visit my mother. After that, I'll begin looking for a company that knows how to value its watchmakers. He nodded slowly. I see. And what if I were to tell you that I don't want to lose my best watchmaker? What if I were to ask you what it would take to convince you to stay and not just repair the watch, but to redesign the entire mechanism? He was offering me a lifeline, but it felt like more than that. It felt like a door. That would depend, I said, feeling a lifetime of quiet competence solidifying into resolve, on what you believe my work is truly worth. We talked for another hour. It wasn't a negotiation so much as a collaborative design session. I laid out the structural flaws in the department as I saw them, the lack of formal training, the reliance on single points of failure, namely, me, the culture that rewarded visibility over substance. He listened, asking sharp, insightful questions. He wasn't just trying to solve the immediate crisis, he was genuinely dissecting the problem. I'm creating a new position, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. Director of Process Architecture. It won't report to Eleanor. It will report directly to me. Your mandate will be to redesign and implement operational workflows not just for this department, but for the entire division. You'll have budget for your own team. We'll double your current salary, with a significant performance bonus tied to efficiency gains and employee retention. He paused, his eyes holding mine. The position is yours, Clara. If you want it. The offer was staggering. It was more than I had ever allowed myself to hope for. It was validation on a scale I had never imagined. And yet, I hesitated. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Harrison. It's very generous, I said. But a new title and a bigger salary don't change the history. I would be walking back into a team that has only ever seen me as support staff and a manager who sees me as a threat. That's a fair point, he conceded. What do you propose? I'll need some time, I said. I need to be sure that I'm accepting for the right reasons. Not just as a reaction to being undervalued, but because I truly believe I can build something better here. Can I give you my answer on Monday? Take the weekend, he said, standing and extending his hand. His handshake was firm and dry. But Clara, in the meantime, I would consider it a sign of good faith if you could get the divisional reports running. I allowed myself a small smile. I'll see what I can do. When I returned to my desk, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. I ignored the curious stares and spent the next 2 hours working with a shell-shocked member of the IT team. I didn't fix the system myself. I walked him through the steps, referencing the exact sections of the atlas, explaining the logic behind each command. I was teaching, not just doing. By 4 o'clock, the servers were stable and the reports were generating correctly. At 4:30, Eleanor appeared at my cubicle. She looked tired and diminished. I heard about Mr. Harrison's offer, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Congratulations. Thank you, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I want you to know, she struggled for the words, I never thought you were incompetent. I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen to my department if you moved up and out. I relied on you too much. I held you back because it made my own job easier. It was a stunning, nakedly honest confession. It was not an apology, not really, but it was something far more valuable, the truth. I know, I said. That's the core of the problem, isn't it? Good leaders build people up, even if it means they leave. They don't hold them down to prop themselves up. She had no reply. She simply nodded, a jerky, defeated motion, and walked back to her corner office, which suddenly seemed less like a seat of power and more like a lonely cage. That weekend was a blur of rain and reflection. I spent Saturday with my mother, truly present, our conversation easy and unhurried. On Sunday, I went in my father's old workbench. The space smelled faintly of oil and old wood. I picked up his loop, the brass worn smooth from his touch, and held it to my eye. I looked at the intricate, non-functional movement of an old pocket watch he'd been tinkering with before he died. I saw the tangled hairspring, the misaligned gears, the dust. My sister called while I was there. I told her everything, the breakdown, the resignation, the offer. So, what are you going to do? She asked. Are you going to take it? Make Eleanor Vance sweat every day for the rest of her career? Her question hung in the air. Was that what I wanted? Revenge? The satisfaction of seeing my former boss diminished, forced to report to my new team for operational guidance? I thought of Eleanor's pale, strained face. I thought of her confession. There was no triumph in that. There was just a shared, human brokenness. No, I said slowly, a new clarity dawning. That's not the point. Revenge just perpetuates the cycle. The point isn't to punish the people in the broken system. The point is to fix the system itself. On Monday morning, I walked into Mr. Harrison's office at 8 a.m. I'll accept your offer, I said, before he could even offer me coffee. On 2 conditions. He raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. First, I want full hiring authority for a team of 3 analysts to be chosen by me from existing Ethelred employees. I believe there are other invisible people here who just need a chance to be seen. Done, he said without hesitation. And the second? Eleanor stays in her role as Director of Client Strategy, I said. And I want to work with her. She's brilliant with clients. That's her strength. The operational side is her weakness. Let me build a structure that supports her, that frees her up to do what she does best. Let's make the whole division stronger, not just settle old scores. Mr. Harrison studied me for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. That's a surprising and astute move, Clara. Most people in your position would want blood. I'm not interested in blood, I replied. I'm a watchmaker. I'm interested in making things work. The official announcement of my new role sent a seismic shock through the division. The congratulations that flooded my inbox felt different this time. They were laced with a genuine respect, especially from the administrative and support staff, the other invisible gears of the company who understood exactly what had happened. My relationship with Eleanor was transformed. It wasn't warm, not at first, but it was built on a new, clear-eyed foundation of mutual respect for our different skills. I built the operational engine. She drove the client-facing vehicle. We met twice a week, and our conversations were crisp, productive, and devoid of the old subtext. Freed from the operational details she secretly feared and resented, she thrived. Our division's client satisfaction scores began to climb. My new team was my greatest joy. I found a brilliant data analyst languishing in a junior marketing role and a quiet, methodical process thinker who had been working as a scheduler. I gave them responsibility, trusted their instincts, and publicly celebrated their wins. I was determined that the Atlas would no longer be the work of a single person, but the shared knowledge of a collaborative, resilient team. 6 months later, I was leaving the office at 5 o'clock on a Friday. It was a habit I guarded fiercely. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, the rain had stopped, and the setting sun was painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold. The city of Port Blossom, my city, felt vibrant and full of promise. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Harrison. Board meeting just ended. They've approved the budget for you to roll out your process architecture framework company-wide. They also approved your promotion to vice president. Eleanor gave the most passionate speech in your support. Said you were the best thing that ever happened to this company. Congratulations, Clara. You've earned it. I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The new title was nice. The recognition was gratifying. But the real victory wasn't the corner office or the paycheck. The real victory was the quiet satisfaction of looking at a vast, complex machine, not as an outsider, but as its architect. It was knowing that I hadn't just fixed a broken watch, but had built a better one, a more resilient one, with a heart that was strong and visible for all to see. It was the feeling of my own life, once a collection of neglected parts, now ticking along in perfect, harmonious time. The greatest lesson my father taught me wasn't just about the hidden movements inside a watch. It was that sometimes you have to be willing to let everything stop, just for a moment, to finally understand how to make it all truly work.